Hey everyone, and welcome to the
Wait.
MAME Podcast, the show where I interview and I talk to engineers, professors. I'm Philip. I'm the VP Events of MAME, the Mcgill Association of Mechanical Engineers. And today's guest is a super beloved professor at McGill in mechanical engineering. May I introduce Professor Mélanie Tétreault-Friend. Hi.
Hello. Thank you, Philip, for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. It's been a bit hard communicating with COVID. We weren't sure if we were still meeting, but glad you're here.
Yeah, it's a strange time in the flood of emails that we're getting right now. So
yeah, exactly. Communication is mostly email, so it can be hard to. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Professor.
So I guess I'm originally from Montreal and one of the few professors, I guess. And born and raised. And I actually did not start out in engineering. I was a musician and I went to the conservatoire. And then I had a crisis, and then I switched, and I actually also have been to Concordia. So I was at Concordia for a year, and then somehow made it to McGill, did my undergrad, and then I went to grad school at MIT, and I've been here so I finished that in 2018, and I've been at McGill since then.
Wow, that's really cool. So you initially started with music, Conservatoire de Montréal, right?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I have a friend that's there. Apparently it's really fun. But at Concordia, were you in engineering as well?
No, so what happened was I was in music and it was the middle of the summer, and then I sort of had a breakdown realization and dropped out. I was in my undergrad, and so I dropped out very last minute, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. So I was 20 at the time. So I enrolled as an independent student at Concordia. So McGill doesn't have, or at least at the time didn't have that sort of option. So I was an independent student. So I basically did U0 at Concordia because I didn't have any of the CJEP science requirements.
Oh, okay. You didn't go to CJEP or?
I did CJEP, but in music as well.
Oh, right. Okay. So it was kind of a year to get to figure out what you want to do and what you like.
Exactly.
I find that that's kind of a good thing to do, like to take a break and make sure you want to do what you're doing, you know?
Yep. It's okay not to know when you're in CJEP or done high school what you want to do. It's okay. Things can work out.
Exactly. And then why did you choose McGill Engineering then?
It's a long story. I wanted to do physics. Well, actually, I always really loved math, and I loved science, but particularly math. And in that year at Concordia, it was really exploring different ideas, things I could do. And I read a lot of science magazines. I read a lot of like Scientific American, and I saw this video on, so string theory was really a hot topic back then. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not so hot anymore, but back then it was all the rage. And so I saw this video, this documentary on string theory, and read about it. And I got really excited about physics and thought I was going to do physics. And and my brother is a mechanical engineer, and he said, "What kind of job are you going to do with physics?" So he convinced me to do mechanical engineering instead. And so that's how I basically ended up in mechanical engineering.
Yeah, and I mean, physics and engineering are pretty related.
They are.
Yeah, I imagine. I think you did your grad school in nuclear engineering.
Yeah, and I would say that was maybe the dream for me, because nuclear engineering was really at the intersection of physics and mechanical engineering. So
yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And so at McGill in your undergrad, were you involved? What kind of student were you?
So that's a fun question. I guess things have changed since I was an undergrad, which is kind of surprising. And because I was an undergrad, I started in 2008 and graduated in 2012. And in that, 12 years since, the number of women in the program has maybe doubled.
Yeah.
So there were a lot less women, and so it was a little less comfortable as a woman in engineering to be, you felt a little bit more like a token woman if you were, one or two women in a class of 50. So things were a little different back then. And I was also older than most of the students since I had done this non-conventional background. So so I don't know what to say. I studied a lot, I worked a lot, and
I assume you were a pretty good student if you ended up at MIT.
Yeah, I mean, I got involved as much as I could. I did do a lot of research with professors. I like talking to different professors about their research. I always thought that was exciting. And I was the manager of the engineering peer tutoring service.
Oh yeah, cool.
And so I think that's when I really fell in love with teaching, because I loved tutoring.
Helping others.
Yeah. So that was and I don't know what else to say. I don't know if expecting some juicy details about my past.
That's exactly what I was expecting.
You can just go ask the other professors.
Exactly. I mean, does it feel weird to actually be a coworker with some of your own professors?
Absolutely. It was super awkward. Very, very weird. So
do you still see them as professors or more as coworkers or colleagues?
So when I came back to McGill, I realized that I didn't know the first name of most of my colleagues. And I just wanted to call them like Professor so-and-so constantly.
Yeah.
So that was awkward. But yeah, it was definitely weird. I felt like a kid walking around, like, what am I doing here? Yeah. What am I doing at the adults table?
Since when are you a professor? I think you said 2018?
Yep, 2018.
Okay, so you start teaching and then COVID happens. So it's how's that been for you as a teacher?
It sucks. It's a shit show.
Yeah.
It's painful for everyone. It's a lot of work. And especially as a junior professor, so I'm teaching a course for like heat transfer for the first time. And thermo is a little easier since I've taught it a couple of times. So I know like what are the what to expect, what students find difficult. So teaching it from a distance, you don't get that like physical interaction. And it's hard to gauge because everybody's overwhelmed right now. It's hard to gauge how students are feeling when they're not really right in front of you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so not seeing people in person, and it's a lot of work, and everybody is, yeah.
Everybody has an opinion also about the exams and the assignments. So you have to really try to find a good solution for everyone, basically.
Yeah, and it's trying to be accommodating while still making sure that people are learning something.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like an impossible balance to get right now. So everybody is just, trying to do the best they can.
Yeah, I find that it's kind of a different kind of learning. When you're in class, you learn the material, then you have the exam. But now the exams are slightly different, sometimes on an extended period. So it's more like an assignment where you have to, you get more time to think and to develop your answers. So
but you're constantly thinking, you're constantly like engaged. And yeah, I know. I mean, I feel for the students because I mean, the last exam that I took was in 2016. So it wasn't actually that long ago. Yeah, exactly. So I definitely remember. And I think you probably arrive to the end of your undergrad and you feel super confident that you've developed like this really optimized routine of how to be
Exactly.
successful, and then it just like everything is thrown out the window and you have to start over because it's a completely different way
Yeah.
of doing things. So I know it's got to be super rough.
Right. I know a lot of people also have a hard time staying concentrated in the live lectures. You know, you're on your computer. There's no one around you, and you have to. At least we have the recorded lectures, so I find that's
Yeah,
pretty,
but then because you're less focused, then you're probably
yeah.
like, oh, I have to pause a million times, and
Right.
yeah.
So it's pretty weird because I go to my lectures, but I miss chunks, so then I have to rewatch the lecture anyway. But at the same time, you know, the lecture, the recorded lecture, you get a chance to really pause and stop to think and understand. So that's pretty useful. Sometimes
Yeah.
in class, you just try to go fast and just copy whatever the prof is writing.
Yeah, like act now, think later, whatever.
Exactly. Like you're not actually thinking, but right now you don't have to stress as much to get your notes. You can just pay attention and try to assimilate the material.
Yeah, but do you think like we're all letting things take up more time in our lives, more time than they should? So
In
like,
what way? Like,
so I know for me, it's like,
right.
oh, I have this time at home to prepare this lecture, and I'm going to put way more time than I should be into preparing this lecture.
Yeah, I feel that's
And
true.
yeah, and then with this new luxury of having the lectures recorded, and it's like, oh, it's fine if I zone out
Exactly.
for, yeah.
And like
So
I'll give you an example. Like I had a midterm. It was like 24 hours, and you know, I could have like done it in 4 hours, but instead I used the whole 24 hours to do it because you know you have the time. You're not just gonna. You're not. I don't know. It's like a mental thing, maybe.
Yep, I hear
24
you.
hours.
Yep, I would have done the same thing. But
Exactly.
yeah, we're all like learning how to, yeah, be very disciplined.
I mean, at the same time, my exam is more well written and it's more thoughtful, so I get a better grade because I get the time to think about everything. But on the other hand, I use like so much time for you know for every single detail, so it's a win
Yep,
and lose situation, you know.
yep, I hear you. Yep.
So you chose to go in nuclear engineering, I think.
Yep.
Can you describe what that is for someone who might not know it? Sorry.
So nuclear engineering can be a couple of things. There are different branches. So where I went to grad school, nuclear engineering, the program had so basically fission, which is fission energy, producing energy from fission reactions. And so that's all related to developing nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
And then you have fusion, which is this impossible energy, which is from fusion. And so fusion is instead of having nuclei that are split in half or split, and then you produce all of this nuclear waste that people are afraid of. Fission and fusion doesn't have that disadvantage. There's also nuclear policy. So people who are looking into policy of, in Iran, Iran was developing their nuclear power program, and MIT was very involved in negotiating. In fact, some of the director of the nuclear program in Iran, I think, had done their PhD at MIT in nuclear engineering. So yeah, so there was people in policy, there's people in security, so non-proliferation. So I was in the energy generation.
Okay.
So
with fission.
I don't know why I'm like turning orange. This is kind of.
I don't know. Maybe it's because of your background.
Yeah.
Of the light outside. Now you're.
Yeah. Now I'm back to I was turning into Donald Trump.
Exactly. So you were saying that you're working with more in the fission of and the energy, how to use nuclear more efficiently, maybe?
Yeah, okay, so then in the specifics of fission. So basically, and then in fission, I would say people will kill me for saying, but I viewed, there were two big categories of fission energy. So
Okay.
the two big categories are basically the physicists and the mechanical engineers. So the physicists are working on optimizing your reactor core. So you have a core that's filled with all of these fuel rods that have uranium in them. And then you have these neutrons that are flying around, and neutrons are kicking these nuclei, and everything is splitting and producing heat. And you can optimize a nuclear reactor and the way it produces heat and its reactivity by modifying the density, modifying the materials that you're using, modifying the pitch of the the fuel rods, a whole bunch of things, or a whole bunch of parameters to optimize. And so it's basically like really applied quantum physics. And then
on the engineering side.
Yeah, and then on the more mechanical engineering side, it's like, okay, I produced all of this heat in a nuclear reactor. What do I do with this heat? So then it's like managing, how am I going to remove all the heat? So a lot of people in nuclear engineering are experts in boiling heat transfer, because most of these power plants operate on like Rankine cycles, which you guys see in Thermo 2.
Yeah.
So you have like steam that's being generated in the nuclear reactor, and it's how do you generate that steam in a safe way that doesn't melt the reactor, and what do you do with that steam, and how do you design this whole reactor in a safe way.
Very cool. And so you did your master's and PhD on that topic?
Yeah, so my master's was related to boiling heat transfer. So it was so there's a limit to the flux that you can apply in a nuclear reactor, the heat flux. And then at some point, the flux becomes so high that you reach this limit called critical heat flux, and then you can basically melt your entire reactor if you reach that limit. So it's how to enhance that limit. So I worked on that in my master's. And I realized that I didn't really like bubbles. So there's a lot of looking at bubbles, doing experiments and looking at bubbles and understanding bubbles. And I was kind of over bubbles after 2 years. You got your
fair share of bubbles. Okay.
Yep, I was done with that. And so I found a different project. So there's like a whole bunch of next generation nuclear technologies that are being developed. And one of the really popular ones is called molten salt reactors.
Yeah.
So instead of water, you have molten salts. So you take, like a lot of them use these flibe salts that are like at above 1,000 degrees C.
Wow.
And it has like the fuel, instead of being in a fuel rod, a lot of them have uranium fuel just dissolved in the molten salt. So the whole thing is just like a massive amount of just fuel just flowing through the reactor. And so this is like a new specialty of nuclear engineering of this next generation. So because of this specialty in molten salt, molten salts are also used in the area of concentrating solar power.
Yeah.
So
I think that's
got involved in a lot of energy projects. And
right.
So this one was in mechanical engineering. So I sort of went back to mechanical engineering in a way. So there was a project in mechanical engineering that was related to developing a new molten salt concentrating solar power system. And so it was a collaboration between nuclear and mechanical. So it was like combining our expertise, the nuclear expertise in radiation and molten salts with the mechanical engineering expertise of the solar energy. So I moved on to that, and I was developing like a new solar receiver made out of molten salt and optimizing the whole thermal design.
Wow, nice. And for molten salts, what are some of the properties? Why molten salts?
Yep. So water, you probably saw, has a very high heat capacity. So if you multiply like density times specific heat, you get a very high heat capacity. And so water is another molten salt is another unique fluid that also has very high heat capacity. So you can, similar to water, so it has that advantage that you can
Store
a lot of energy as heat in a small volume. So it has the benefits of water. It has similar viscosity to water. So a lot of people imagine molten salts as this very viscous, like honey or something, but it's actually, it looks, when it's molten, it looks like water.
Okay.
Surprisingly, except it's like 1,000 degrees, between 500 and 1,000 degrees or something.
Right.
So it has a much larger temperature range. So, you know, MC delta T.
Yeah.
Your delta T is a lot bigger. So you can store a lot more heat. It has very good for nuclear energy. It has very good neutronics properties. So you produce less nuclear waste. So it's good for the, and also fissile products that are bad for proliferation, for people who are worried about bomb proliferation and things like that. It's very cheap. Molten salt is very, very cheap. Everybody has salt at home. So these salts are literally as simple as the salt that you put on your food.
Yeah. It's just normal salt, but at high temperature.
Yeah. So some are chloride salts, some are nitrate salts, are just used as fertilizers. So it's just really normal, non-hazardous chemical that's very cheap. So those are the main advantages.
Oh, cool. Wow. And I remember I actually came into McGill, I think at the same time as you, when you started to be a prof, and you came in our Mech 201 class with Professor Mongeau, and you did like a guest lecture.
Yep.
It was really interesting. I think you were talking about nuclear energy in general, and how maybe it's not perceived in the right way. Maybe I think there's like an aura around nuclear energy, like a bad aura or something.
Yeah, in general, I think people are, surprisingly, it's having like a second wave of people are now considering nuclear, and a lot of scientists consider nuclear as having a really important role in the solution to climate change. But there is, definitely a problem in perception and of nuclear energy, and that public perception affects politics, and the people that we elect will decide if we should fund or not fund nuclear energy. So unfortunately, I think this has really inhibited the development of nuclear power over time, because it's often like for 10 years politically it's very popular, so there's a huge amount of money that goes into nuclear, and then all of a sudden somebody gets elected and
it stops.
And then progress stops, and so it's a lot of stop and go.
So how is nuclear, maybe how does it stand out from other types of energies, or like fossil fuels, or what are the advantages?
I mean, it doesn't produce CO2. It has very low greenhouse gas emissions, so similar to PV, solar energy, so it doesn't have those disadvantages. And it's very mature. So contrary to PV, it's an energy source that's very mature, and we're able to produce electricity 24/7, so it doesn't have like the disadvantages of intermittency. So and with respect to, for example, hydro, we're incredibly lucky in Quebec to have the hydro that we have. And I think before I left, I didn't realize how lucky we were. And then leaving Quebec and realizing that this is very unique, and most places in the world don't have access to this water to produce hydropower. There are not a lot of options for producing clean energy. So nuclear power can, be anywhere in the world. There's no, I mean, except maybe, Fukushima was you don't want to,
right.
There are, of course, limitations due to, seismic activity and stuff like that. But it's easier to install a new nuclear power plant than a hydropower plant.
Right. I think maybe the stigma around nuclear energy might be caused because of these big accidents that happened.
Yeah, exactly. The accidents, and people are very afraid of the waste, the nuclear waste.
Yeah, for sure. So after your time at MIT, you came. Why you knew you wanted to be a professor, and you came back to McGill?
Yeah, I came back to McGill. Yeah.
And what does your research focus on? Is it still molten salts and solar energy?
Yep. So I'm very much focused in the whole molten salt. So molten salt, just the basic physics of molten salt. So heat transfer in molten salts for both nuclear and solar energy applications. And yeah, so the basics of molten salts, but then also more applications of concentrating solar power and nuclear energy. So we have a big lamp that is called a solar simulator, and it's so we have that coming in the lab, and it's basically, it replicates the sun. So the same spectrum of the sun, but 100 times the flux of the sun. So in concentrating solar power, you take natural sunlight and you concentrate it, and you use the concentrated sunlight as a source of heat. So we have, in order to do lab experiments, you need something to reproduce those high fluxes of solar energy in the lab. So we have these very powerful lamps that can reproduce that.
Yeah, cool. I think many people, when they think about solar, they think about like solar panels. Or so how does molten salt maybe is different than, how is it different than the regular solar panels, or how is it applied to solar energy?
Yep. So the big difference, so you're right, PV is a little bit more mature. And so PV, you basically take solar radiation and you convert it directly to electricity. And so in that case, in order to store the electricity, typically we use batteries. So that's the, in renewable energy, the problem is always storage. So how are you going to store this intermittent energy? So for PV, it's the way to store it, the most efficient way to store it right now is basically batteries.
And PV is a photovoltaic, is that?
Yeah, exactly. Photovoltaic. So the word literally says it, photovoltaic. So photons
voltage from photons,
exactly. So that's PV, and then concentrating solar power is a very, very different application of solar energy. I would say concentrating solar power is much more in the realm of mechanical engineers than photovoltaic. So concentrating solar power, like I said, we're not producing electricity directly, we're producing heat. And then we use that heat to run a power cycle. So right now, most CSP plants actually operate, again, Rankine cycles. So the molten salt passes through a steam generator, and then it produces steam. And then again, similar Rankine cycle, thermo 2 type of.
So it's very similar to nuclear, but the heat comes from somewhere else, basically.
Exactly. So what you have is you have like these giant fields of mirrors that concentrate the sunlight, and then it concentrates it on a receiver, and the receiver it's like a bunch of tubes, and the tubes have molten salt flowing inside. So the tubes get heated by the sunlight, and then the molten salt gets heated, and then the molten salt is circulated, it's pumped to the steam generator, and then
the cycle.
But the main advantage is so the nice thing about heat is it's not efficient at all. So you guys are in Carnot cycle and everything, and it's not efficient at all, but it's dirt cheap, or salt cheap, I should say. So
nice.
So basically what you do is during the day you produce way too much energy. So the excess energy at noon that you're producing, you can store it as thermal energy. So you have this big tank of salt that is like the extra hot salt that you heated during the day. So you have these gigantic tanks of salt, and then at night, this big tank of salt starts to discharge, and you could still produce electricity by discharging the hot salt that you store during the day. So the advantage is that it's very, very low cost. And so in the end, it can be very competitive, particularly in places like Australia or Nevada or these very sunny places.
Hot places.
Yeah.
So it's like a big thermal battery that's serves to regulate the energy input.
Exactly.
Maybe?
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
That's really cool. And so what are some of the applications? I'm thinking maybe manufacturing or to regulate a building or something.
Yeah, so the main application of concentrating solar power, I guess the main objective is to produce electricity. And so PV is more something that you could, for example, put on you could put PV panels on your home and just power a single house. Whereas concentrating solar power, you would want to use this to, a megawatt power plant type.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, for electricity. There are other applications. So, for example, you can use the heat produced for process heat. So some manufacturing processes are very, very high temperature, and what people usually do is they burn fossil fuels to produce heat.
Yeah.
So you can replace that with concentrating solar power. So you take the heat instead from concentrating solar power. So that's another application. Some applications related to chemical applications and stuff like that, but those are the main ones. I've also seen like these parabolic troughs. It's one of the designs of concentrating solar power that are to produce steam that are used for like dairy farm applications, things like that. So basically anywhere you can use high temperature heat is
useful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, very cool. I'm thinking I had an internship this summer and we used I think there was a system in the manufacturing plant where I think they needed the heat. They took the heat from the machines, which peaked, during the day when the machines were working, and then they reused the heat to during the night, maybe for heating or for general heating in the building.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big topic. So how do we make processes more efficient using process heat from these processing applications to, absolutely. So that's
Very
definitely
cool.
a big area. So I've seen, for example, like arenas where they have to cool the ice, and they use these heat pumps, and then that produces a lot of heat, and then you could reuse that heat and make the whole thing very much more sustainable if you by reusing the heat. Yeah.
It's interesting because it's concepts that many people can understand, just we use the heat somewhere else. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, this is just like basic Thermo 1 stuff. It's not
exactly. It's also very sustainable, as you mentioned. So that's really cool. And so in your research, do you work with a lot of maybe students, undergrads or grad students?
Yeah, I've had quite a few undergrads work. So I mean, in just the 2 years, I've had a capstone team. I had an awesome capstone team that designed and built a huge frame to put our solar simulator in.
Nice.
And I've had 2 students in the pandemic this summer that that worked for me.
SURE program.
Yeah, 2 SURE students over the summer that were also amazing and helped. So the capstone team couldn't build their project. So I had some SURE students come in and help complete that, and then take it even further and design other systems. So definitely work a lot with undergrad students.
Yeah. As maybe an undergrad, what's something that say I was going to do the SURE program with you, what's something that I would be doing? You mentioned they finished the project from the other, maybe for next summer. Do you have anything in mind?
Yeah, actually, I was just talking to my PhD student that we had so he's making these like molten salt receivers out of concrete right now. We're testing if we can make them out of cheap materials. So he's like making stuff out of castable cement, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to instrument the whole thing, because it has to take this thing has to be robust enough that we can put molten salt in it and then put it under the solar simulator and heat it, and so that it could withstand all of this. So, you know, how are we going to put all the instrumentation inside? So, it's a lot cheaper and we can make it ourselves compared to a stainless steel tank, but then it has the downsides of how do I stick my instrumentation inside? So
exactly,
that's the type of stuff that a student could potentially work on.
Wow, that's interesting. I know a lot of people want to get involved, maybe get some research experience, but sometimes it can be hard when you're maybe when you start your undergrad. So I think
the SURE program became so
cool.
competitive. It's incredibly competitive. Yeah. So the SURE program started when I was an undergrad, and nobody knew about it. So it was not competitive at all.
I mean, it's kind of a foot in the door for research. Maybe if we want to do a master's, it's good to know that you like research beforehand, maybe,
Yeah, I would definitely say if somebody is debating doing grad school, I would really encourage somebody to do a SURE program, because I think that really is what gave me the confidence to say, okay, yeah, I really do want to do this. I really like this. I understand what research is about.
Yeah, and do you have maybe undergrads that work with you year long, or no, just in the summer?
Yeah, actually, my 2 summer students one is staying on as an honors student, and the other one is.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hesitate to, right now they're not working because it's a crazy time to be taking on any additional workload right now. Definitely. I don't recommend anybody right now overburden themselves.
Yeah.
But it's always good to have students active and try to get capstone teams involved. And yeah.
Is it only for upper year undergrads, or what's your, how do you, maybe I assume we have to do thermo and then maybe heat transfer?
Yeah, thermo is definitely a must, I would say. And probably a little bit of computational work. So Comp 208, you guys still take, right?
Yeah. Comp 208 is actually the first year of the degree.
Yeah, so that hasn't changed. So basically, since I do a little bit of numerical work as well, so Comp 208 is definitely necessary, but then the type of computational work is not anything that you guys learn in any of your courses. So it's not material from Mech 309, for example. So
it's good to be fluent in coding, I think, for research applications.
I mean, not just research, but I think
in general,
engineers don't really use calculators and pen and paper anymore.
Exactly.
I think everything is, I would say that Mech 309 was maybe one of the most useful courses. Mech 2, like the coding courses were maybe the most useful tools that I had learned in undergrad.
Yeah, I know. Also, for the same reason, a lot of people do maybe a minor in computer science just to be fluent. It's a great tool, I think, to have maybe just to do other projects.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, just to be able to write stuff really quickly, and yeah, it's a huge asset.
So you teach Mech 240, thermo, and heat transfer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Mech 346?
Yeah, and are you teaching heat transfer next semester? I think
no, next semester I'm teaching Mech 240. So thermo, I'm teaching heat transfer now, thermo next semester, and I have a grad course on radiative heat transfer and solar energy technology.
Okay, I have heat transfer next semester. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, you'll be taking it with someone else.
Yeah. So I know you went to MIT, and it's pretty much the top 1 school in engineering. Do you have any advice? And a lot of people, I think, kind of dream to go to MIT. What can someone in their undergrad do to maybe have a chance or stand out? I
hate this question.
Yeah, I bet you do. I bet. It's like the secret sauce recipe.
I mean, one thing I will say is when I finished at McGill, we were 3 students from my year in mechanical engineering that went to MIT. So
Yep.
one of us, I went into nuclear, someone went into mechanical, and then someone into aero astro. And and all 3 of us got rejected from other top schools. So I got rejected from Caltech, and I think another one got rejected from Stanford. And so basically what I'm trying to say is, it's like when you get to that level, there are so many amazing students that apply to these schools that they're really literally just looking at like,
are you a good fit for the specific research?
But not even, it's just like these micro differences in the students, So I think, you go to McGill for 4 years and you might think, I thought I was super awesome and
exactly
top of the class. And then I go to MIT and I'm like, holy shit, like there are a lot of smart people and you're definitely not the smartest one in the room anymore. And so when I don't know how these committees accept people, because there are a lot of exceptional people in the world. It's
for sure.
It's crazy. Like there's so many gifted, talented people, and we have a lot of gifted, talented people at McGill. Like it's and the reality is like they can't accept everybody. So so you don't get accepted everywhere. And I hate to say this, but it's the truth. Like GPA is super important. It's super important. There's no way around it. So for these top schools, you definitely need a high GPA. Letters of recommendation. So that's having letters of recommendation from your professors, but also it could be from, work experience. But if you have research experience, it helps. Those are the 2, I guess GREs, but I always hesitate to talk about the GREs because I really did not study for my GREs. I didn't take them seriously at all. And I did terribly. It was very embarrassing. Yeah, it was very embarrassing. I took the exam at the last minute. You're allowed to take it more than once. But I took it at the last minute right before admission, like application deadline. So I had no time to retake it. Oof. And you take this exam and you get your score immediately. And the problem is like this exam is timed. So even if you're good at math, you have to have studied that specific type of math problem and know how to do it very fast. So it's like these probability questions and you have to do them very fast. And it's not that hard, but you have to have prepared more than definitely I did. So I did not prepare for that exam and I got the score immediately. And it's a funny story. I went home and I started crying and I was like, I'm not going to grad school. Oh my God. And at the time, my roommates, when I got home, were watching Good Will Hunting.
Oh my
God.
It
was all about like MIT.
Life,
I'm never going to go to a school like MIT. So anyways, so the GREs turned out in my case were not that important. I think these types of standardized tests are really losing importance in grad school admissions because too many people are learning how to take these tests and they are really not indicative of a student's talent. So it's more like, are you a complete idiot? And if you're, or are you like, okay, then okay, you pass. And so GREs are sort of important. I would definitely encourage to study more than I did.
Okay, that's a good piece of advice.
Not risk it. Maybe I would have been accepted at Caltech.
Yeah, maybe, who knows. So in general, what else, what other piece of advice would you give maybe yourself when you were 20 years or maybe 22 years old?
I wish I had worked more with others when I was in undergrad. So I
Yeah.
did a lot of stuff on my own. I know a lot of students in undergrad will work on their own. Some people will work with other people. And I wish I had not just relied on myself all the time. And that I think going to MIT, at some point, it was so hard that I just couldn't do everything on my own.
Oh,
We started, studying in big groups and
yeah.
because it just becomes impossible. So, and then I realized the value of like, wow, there's so many bright people in the world and I could learn so much from my peers.
Yeah.
And I can't believe I didn't take advantage of that for 4 years. And, often people have different talents than you, and people are,
Hmm.
it's incredible like how varied, how the skills different people have and how much you can learn from other people. That's something, probably my biggest regret from undergrad is not working more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe try to develop your teamwork skills as much as your other skills. Or, I mean, it's really helpful, maybe, especially right now in confinement. You're studying for an exam. It's also good, like, to have someone to study with. It's also less lonely, just having someone to talk to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the worst time to be giving this advice, but
Exactly.
yeah, that's, yeah, right now I can imagine it's really hard for a lot of people to learn alone.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm sure we'll get through it. It's also something to get through. It's a good way to get better at studying in general, and at
Yeah.
teaching also.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are maybe going to be more organized and efficient with their time. So we're all
Mhm.
super inefficient, and probably over time, people are going to learn to be,
Right.
yeah.
And I think for professors, let me know if I'm correct, but I assume that in general, when classes were in person, maybe a professor wouldn't necessarily try to adapt to the online world because you already have all this stuff to do, and then now it's like the perfect opportunity to just to jump in and adapt and find new ways of teaching. So that's also a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us are, at least I'm realizing that the advantages of the virtual side
Yeah.
of things. I don't think I would ever want to do 100%, and I don't think the students would.
No,
That's my
definitely not.
impression. But maybe a mix of the two, um,
Yeah.
would be really great, because I do see sometimes in like the questions that the students ask me when they had time to listen to a recording and maybe play back sections that they didn't
Mhm.
understand. Sometimes the questions actually turn out being a lot more advanced than
Yeah.
what I would normally expect, and that's been pleasantly surprising. So
Because also, as I mentioned earlier, in class you're just trying to copy everything. You're not gonna start to think about a question when you can barely write at the same pace, or you know. But then
yeah,
if you get a chance maybe to think about it beforehand, then you get to have a real discussion with a professor. And even for office hours, maybe have office hours online and in person. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so there's definitely yeah, something to be said about accessibility. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Have you been or so I assume you're in Montreal since you're in McGill. I see the background.
Yes, I was in the lab just before,
Yeah.
so helping some grad students get their research.
Well, cool. It's been fun talking to you. Thanks a lot for agreeing again.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have any projects or plans or ambitions maybe for the future?
Um, no, I mean, yes, but right now it's like very short term, like let's get through this
Hmm.
pandemic. And then
Right.
a lot of projects, I guess, related to some big research I want to do, getting more involved with industry work in Canada. And so, yeah, helping develop some technology in Canada and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's exciting for sure. So yeah, thank you for coming. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for
the students who are interested. We can stay tuned for maybe the SURE program this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always have projects posted for that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, and have a good end of day.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
All right. Bye.